A grandmother, 76 years old, met a fiery, unthinkable end during her Sunday morning shift. The cost of her life, mere pocket change and convenience store loot. Tomorrow, the man who walked away from that blaze, Matthew Johnson, is scheduled to die by lethal injection. 13 years. A lifetime of questions culminating in a single, sterile moment. Johnson admits he was there, admits to the spark, but was it the desperate act of a man consumed by addiction, a soul crying out in the most horrific way imaginable? Or did a cold, calculating mind orchestrate that morning's terror, watching the flames with an unblinking gaze? The official record tells one story. The whispers in the shadows suggest another. As the state of Texas prepares its final fatal response, the true nature of the evil that visited Nancy Harris remains shrouded. What demons did Matthew Johnson truly unleash in that store? The executioner readies the needle, but the full, chilling story is far from over. It festers, waiting for the light, or perhaps for eternal darkness. Dawn breaks over Garland, Texas. May 20th, 2012. A Sunday like any other. Nancy Harris, 76, arrives at the Fina Whip-In convenience store just before 7 a.m. Her wedding ring catches the morning light as she unlocks the door. A grandmother, a fixture in the community, a woman whose warm smile had greeted early customers for years. She doesn't know it yet, but this is her final shift. Surveillance cameras silently record as a man enters the store. Matthew Lee Johnson, 36 years old. His pockets contain a bottle of lighter fluid and a cheap plastic lighter. What transpires next will be played and replayed in courtrooms, on news broadcasts, and in the nightmares of everyone who views the footage. $76. That's what Nancy Harris's life is worth to Johnson. $76, some cigarettes, and the wedding ring from her finger. When Johnson leaves, he walks away from flames. Nancy Harris does not. In less than 60 minutes, police will have Johnson in custody. In 5 days, Nancy Harris will succumb to burns covering nearly half her body. In 13 years to the day, the state of Texas will prepare to end Matthew Johnson's life through lethal injection. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about addiction's grip, about violence lurking in ordinary places, about justice and vengeance, and whether they're truly different. What demons drove a man to set another human being on fire? What does true justice look like for such an unthinkable act? And how does a community heal from watching one of their own die in such a way? Join us on True Crime Inquiry as we untangle this heartbreaking case. Like, share, and subscribe to follow this and other investigations into the darkest corners of human behavior. Every monster has an origin story. Matthew Johnson's begins September 17, 1975, in Dallas County, Texas. The surface details suggest normalcy, a child born into America's oil boom years. But beneath that surface lurked a childhood defined by absence. No supervision, no boundaries, no safety. By age 8, most children worry about homework and playground games. Matthew Johnson worried about his next high. Marijuana became his first escape, a chemical shield against a reality no child should endure. Reports of sexual abuse appear in court records years later, clinical language masking unspeakable damage done to a forming mind. The 1980s crack epidemic found fertile ground in Johnson's fractured psychology. While other middle schoolers passed notes in class, he graduated to crack cocaine. The progression wasn't surprising to addiction specialists. It was textbook. Childhood trauma creates a void. Substances promise to fill it. They never do. At 15, Johnson crossed another line. His first documented crime, a car theft. Small compared to what would come, but significant as the moment society officially labeled him a criminal. The path from troubled teen to violent offender isn't inevitable, but each step makes the next one easier. For 2 decades, Johnson straddled 2 worlds. In one, he functioned, holding jobs, maintaining relationships, even marrying. In the other, addiction ruled everything, pulling him back whenever stability seemed within reach. 2011 should have been Johnson's turning point. He and his wife purchased their first home, the American dream finally within grasp. Then his wife lost her job. Financial pressure mounted. The fragile scaffolding of his normal life began to collapse. Addiction specialists point to a brutal truth about recovery. It's rarely linear. Johnson had sought treatment in 2002, a genuine attempt to break free. But like so many Americans caught in the healthcare system's cracks, his insurance ran out before treatment could take hold. The revolving door spun him back onto the streets, back to familiar chemicals, back to the person he was trying not to be. 7 days before Nancy Harris's murder, Johnson made one final desperate attempt to save himself. and potentially his future victims. He approached police officers, asked to be arrested, told them he needed help. The system, overwhelmed and under-resourced, turned him away. This isn't offered as excuse. Millions face trauma, addiction, and systemic failures without turning to violence. But it forms the backdrop against which the horror at the Fina whip-in would unfold. A man born into neglect, shaped by abuse, trapped in addiction spiral, rejected by systems designed to help, who would soon commit an act from which there could be no return. The question haunting this case isn't simply what Matthew Johnson did, but how many intervention points were missed along the way. How many moments when a different decision, by Johnson himself, by family members, by social services, by healthcare providers, might have altered the course leading to that Sunday morning in May. 1 week after being turned away when seeking help, Matthew Johnson walked into a convenience store with lighter fluid in his pocket and demons in his mind. What happened next would consume 2 lives, Nancy Harris's in flames, and his own in the slow burn of death row. 7 a.m. The first rays of Texas sunshine filter through the windows of the Fina whip-in. Sunday, May 20th, 2012. The security cameras activate with a silent click. Nancy Harris has performed this morning ritual countless times before. Unlock the door. Turn on the lights. Stock the register. Prepare for the day's customers. The comfortable routine of a grandmother dedicated to her work even as others her age embraced retirement. The store remains empty for 23 minutes. 7:23 a.m. The bell above the door chimes. Matthew Johnson enters. The surveillance footage reveals no hesitation in his movements. No nervousness, no visible deliberation. Each step measured with purpose. His right hand clutches something, a plastic bottle filled with clear liquid, lighter fluid. Johnson doesn't browse the aisles, doesn't pretend to shop. He walks directly behind the counter, where Nancy Harris stands. The space designed for a single employee now holds 2 people, one predator, one prey. The next 42 seconds unfold with mechanical precision. Johnson produces the bottle, unscrews the cap. The liquid arcs through the air. Nancy Harris is now covered in accelerant. The register opens. Cash exchanges hands. $76, less than a day's pay for most Americans. Cigarettes and lighters join the spoils. Then something more personal. Harris's wedding ring, wrenched from her finger. A lifetime of memories reduced to loot. 7:25 a.m. Johnson produces a lighter from his pocket. What passes through a man's mind in the moment before he ignites another human being? The surveillance footage offers no insight into this question. It simply records the flick of his thumb, the small flame, the devastating consequence. The camera captures what follows in sterile digital clarity. Nancy Harris becomes a living torch. Johnson doesn't run, doesn't panic. He reaches for candy bars from a nearby shelf, places them methodically in his pocket, walks out the door at an unhurried pace. Outside, the morning continues. Birds sing, church bells ring in the distance. Life proceeds normally everywhere except inside the Fina whip-in. Nancy Harris somehow finds the strength to move, to push through the door, to emerge onto the sidewalk. 2 Garland police officers conducting an unrelated patrol nearby see something no training could prepare them for, a human being consumed by flames in the morning light. Their response is immediate, a fire extinguisher. Urgent calls for medical assistance. In the chaos, Harris provides a description of her attacker. Her final act of courage. The ambulance arrives within minutes. Parkland Memorial Hospital becomes Nancy Harris's new reality. Burns cover more than 40% of her body. The medical team works desperately, but infection sets in. The human body can only withstand so much trauma. 5 days later, on May 25, 2012, Nancy Harris dies. The security footage continues to exist, digitally preserved on hard drives and in evidence rooms. It shows the entire sequence, from Johnson's entrance to his exit, in just under 3 minutes. 3 minutes to end a life that had spanned 76 years. 3 minutes that would lead to 13 years of legal proceedings. 3 minutes that would ultimately result in the state preparing a needle for Matthew Johnson's arm, scheduled for exactly 13 years to the day after he walked into the Fina whip-in, carrying lighter fluid and darkness in his pockets. A human torch staggers onto a Texas sidewalk. 2 police officers witness what no training manual covers. Through unimaginable pain, Nancy Harris speaks 6 words that will seal Matthew Johnson's fate. Black male, red shirt, black shorts. The hunt begins. Johnson doesn't run far, doesn't even try to leave the area. The neighborhood behind the whip-in becomes his hunting ground. Multiple residents dial police as a stranger tests their doorknobs, peers through windows, stalks through backyards, a predator looking for the next opportunity. His path reveals no panic, no remorse, no comprehension of what he's just done. While Nancy Harris fights for her life in an ambulance, Matthew Johnson methodically continues his morning. Smoke from the convenience store rises behind him. The smell of accelerant still clings to his fingers. The clock ticks 7:26 a.m., 7:32 a.m., 7:45 a.m. Police converge from all directions. The net tightens. In an alley between Miller Road and Derry Road, an officer spots him. Johnson runs. Not the desperate sprint of a man fearing justice, but the jog of someone merely inconvenienced. 57 minutes after Nancy Harris burst into flames, Matthew Johnson feels cold steel around his wrists. His first words reveal everything about the man. "What took y'all so long? Y'all are getting slow." No denial, no questions, no fear, just casual arrogance, as if his capture was an inevitability, a formality, a game. The evidence doesn't need to speak, it screams. Johnson's pockets tell the story that security cameras have already documented. Nancy Harris's wedding ring, pried from her finger moments before he set her ablaze. A used cigarette lighter, the instrument of unspeakable suffering. Fresh lighters and cigarettes, his intended prizes. $76 in cash, the price he placed on a grandmother's life. Back at the whip-in, investigators review the footage. 3 minutes of horror captured in high definition. No technical analysis needed, no expert testimony required. The images speak with devastating clarity. Every movement Johnson made is preserved. The fluid arc of lighter fluid coating his victim, the casual flick of the lighter, the unhurried selection of candy bars while flames engulf another human being. The leisurely exit as Nancy Harris burns. What the cameras can't show is intent. What they can't explain is why. The surveillance footage documents actions, not motivations. It shows what happened, not the lifetime of failures that led to this moment. Detectives assemble Johnson's morning piece by piece. The crack cocaine consumed hours earlier. The alcohol still in his system. The desperate need for cash after days without drugs. The selection of a vulnerable target, an elderly woman working alone. But chemical influence doesn't explain the calculated nature of the attack. It doesn't justify the lighter fluid carried in his pocket. It doesn't account for the casual cruelty on display. As Nancy Harris fights for her life in Parkland Memorial Hospital's burn unit, Matthew Johnson sits in an interrogation room. No lawyer present. No pleas of innocence. No signs of the man cracking under pressure. The detective across the table has one question that will haunt this case. Why did you have to set her on fire? Johnson's answer changes everything. Investigators thought they understood about the crime. What he says reshapes the narrative, transforms the prosecution's approach, and sets in motion the machinery that will lead to his execution 13 years later. The flames at the whip-in have been extinguished, but the fire of justice is just beginning to burn. And in a hospital bed across town, Nancy Harris's body wages a battle it cannot win. October 2013, Dallas County Courthouse. The man who set a grandmother on fire sits beneath fluorescent lights, his face a blank canvas. Matthew Johnson wears a suit. Someone else selected. His handcuffs removed for appearances. A performance of normalcy that fools no one. The prosecution's case requires just 7 minutes. They press play. The security footage fills the courtroom screens. 76-year-old Nancy Harris's final moments projected in high definition. Jurors flinch. A bailiff looks away. Johnson watches without expression. No eyewitness testimony needed. No forensic debate required. The video leaves nothing to interpretation. When Johnson takes the stand, the courtroom temperature drops 10 degrees. He speaks in a monotone, recounting childhood horrors clinically, sexual abuse at 8, crack cocaine by 13, failed rehabilitation attempts, a system that repeatedly failed him, a life spiraling toward that Sunday morning at the whip-in. Then comes his defense. I didn't mean to kill her. The lighter, he claims, was only meant to scare Harris. The accelerant, just a threat. The resulting inferno, an accident. But Johnson contradicts himself within the same testimony. I feel like scum, he tells the jury. I deserve the death penalty, which is the real Matthew Johnson. The man claiming unintended consequences, or the man embracing his punishment. The prosecution circles this contradiction like sharks smelling blood. They break down the timeline, purchasing lighter fluid the previous day, carrying it specifically to the store, the methodical application to Harris's body, the unhurried selection of candy, while she burned, These aren't impulsive actions. These aren't the chaotic movements of a mind clouded by drugs. This is calculation. The defense counters with brain scans. Childhood trauma physically rewires neural pathways. Addiction chemically alters decision-making. Their expert witnesses use clinical terms like diminished capacity and impaired executive function. But science crashes against human emotion when the jury views the footage a second time. 9 hours of deliberation spread across 2 days. Not about guilt. That was never in question. The debate centers on a single query. Does Matthew Johnson deserve to die for what he did to Nancy Harris? 12 citizens answer, yes, death by lethal injection. The sentence passes Johnson's face without leaving a mark. But something shifts in the aftermath. Behind bars, awaiting appeals, Johnson begins to write letters to the court, letters to newspapers, letters that claim to reveal his truth. This is the end, but for me it's the beginning of life. He pens to the Texas Observer, I truly love you, Mrs. Harris, and I'm sorry. Are these the words of a man finding genuine remorse or calculated attempts to avoid execution? The sincerity impossible to measure. His prison behavior suggests change. No disciplinary incidents in 13 years. Voluntary participation in addiction programs he no longer needs. Mentorship of younger inmates. But transformation behind bars cannot resurrect Nancy Harris. The appeals process grinds forward. Johnson's attorneys file motion after motion. His troubled past becomes their central argument. The drugs in his system. The abuse in his childhood. The desperate attempt to seek help 1 week before the murder. Each appeal denied. Each year Harris's birthday passes. Each year Johnson remains alive. Something haunts this case beyond the horror of the crime itself. A question that neither the verdict nor the sentence can answer. If Matthew Johnson had received help when he begged for it 1 week earlier, would Nancy Harris still be alive? Justice moves forward, while this question remains forever suspended, unanswerable. The clock ticks toward May 20th, 2025. Justice moves at the pace of bureaucracy. Matthew Johnson's death sentence did too, 2013 to 2025. 12 years of appeals, 12 years of Harris family birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries. Each one missing Nancy's smile, each one shadowed by unfinished business. The legal system churned methodically. State habeas corpus 2019, denied. Federal habeas corpus 2022 denied. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, 2023, denied. Supreme Court of the United States, February 20th, 2024. Petition rejected without comment. 4 courts, 4 closed doors. Justice was unwavering, but not swift. While Nancy Harris's family placed flowers on her grave for the 12th time, Matthew Johnson's attorneys drafted one final plea for mercy. April 2025, a clemency application landed on mahogany desks at the Texas Board of Pardons and Pearls. 27 pages detailing childhood horrors, addiction's grip, prison transformation. 27 pages asking 7 officials to recommend what Texas has granted only 3 times since 1976. Clemency from death row. The odds aren't just long, they're nearly non-existent. Meanwhile, Johnson's legal team attacked from another angle, challenging the execution date itself, procedural technicalities, administrative errors, the desperate moves of men trying to stop an inevitable clock. But clocks stopped for no one. Not for Matthew Johnson. Not for Nancy Harris. Inside the Harris home, grief has evolved but never diminished. 13 years hasn't softened the family's wounds. It's hardened their resolve. I'll be there, Nancy's eldest son told prosecutors. I'll watch him take his last breath, just like he watched my mother burn. His brother refused the witness room invitation. I hope my mother's screams follow him to whatever hell awaits, he said during his victim impact statement. I hope they echo there for eternity. Nancy's youngest granddaughter, 16 at the time of the murder, is now approaching 30. The milestones her grandmother missed stack up like unopened gifts. Graduation, marriage, children, each celebration marked by an empty chair. She taught me to garden, she testified. Now I plant flowers at her grave instead of in her backyard. Outside the courthouse, opposing vigils formed, death penalty abolitionists holding candles on one corner. Harris family supporters clutching Nancy's photographs on another. Between them, an unbridgeable gulf of principle versus personal pain. Advocacy groups published open letters questioning Johnson's death sentence. The Matthew Johnson behind bars hasn't harmed anyone in 13 years, they argued. Addiction fueled his violence. In a controlled environment, that trigger doesn't exist. The Harris family's attorney responded with a single devastating counter. Nancy Harris doesn't get a second chance. Why should her killer? Prison officials report Johnson spends his final days in reflection. No television, no radio, just meditation and letters. Letters to God, letters to Nancy Harris, letters that will remain sealed long after their author is gone. The execution chamber at Huntsville waits. Antiseptic, sterile. Everything the murder of Nancy Harris wasn't. 13 years ago, a single act of violence consumed 2 lives, one immediately, one by slow bureaucratic certainty. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., the state of Texas will complete what Matthew Johnson started on that Sunday morning. The culmination of a process stretching 4,748 days, multiple judges, thousands of legal pages, countless tears. Matthew Johnson will become inmate #574. The 574th person Texas has executed since reinstating capital punishment. For Nancy Harris's family, one chapter ends. But grief doesn't follow a legal timeline. The flames Johnson ignited that morning continue to burn through generations, scorching everyone they touch. Justice arrives tomorrow at 6 p.m. Whether it brings peace remains the final, unanswerable question of this case. 13 years dissolves into 60 seconds of lethal chemicals. Matthew Johnson becomes Texas execution number 574. A statistic. The culmination of a life that began in neglect and ends in clinical precision. This is the end, he wrote last week. But for me, it's the beginning of life. Words that hang in the sterile air of death row. For the Harris family, the needle offers no resurrection, no grandmother restored to Sunday dinners, no graduation photos with Nancy smiling proudly. The state can execute Matthew Johnson, but it cannot execute their grief. The question lingers like smoke. Is this justice or merely its closest approximation? Does Johnson's death balance some cosmic scale, or simply add another body to the ledger? This case forces us to confront the darkest corners of our society. A system that ignored Johnson's pleas for help 1 week before Nancy Harris burned. A justice process that took 13 years to travel from crime to punishment. A society that warehouses the broken until they shatter completely. Nancy Harris died because a man saw her as less valuable than $76. Matthew Johnson dies because we decided his redemption was less valuable than retribution. 2 lives. One ended in flames on a Sunday morning. One ends tomorrow with chemicals in a vein. Both departures leave the same question echoing in their wake. Was there another way? Join us next week on True Crime Inquiry as we continue exploring the cases that define American justice.